We are coming to you live from Berlin. Today, we're watching the war between the US, Israel and Iran moving in what could be two directions. I'm Anya Coopers-McKinnon.
And I'm Brent Goff. It's good to have you with us. Overnight, we learned that the United States is moving more troops to the Middle East, even as President Trump says that negotiations to end the war are happening behind the scenes. So what is it? Talks or troops or both? We want you to send us your questions and comments, and we will do our best to answer them. We're going to put them also to our guests, including a former analyst with the Department of National Defense in Canada.
That's right. Send us your questions, your comments. It's always a great part of this live stream. A shout out as well to people watching us from anywhere in Asia. We don't have to tell you that anything that needs energy costs a lot more than it used to because of this conflict that we are talking about. And oil prices aren't looking like they're going to come down anytime soon. We will be talking about that a bit later. First, though,
we got a big question. Where is this war headed? Now, what we do know is that the Pentagon is preparing to deploy elements of the 82nd Airborne Division. That's an elite rapid response unit that's capable of going anywhere in the world, deploying globally within 18 hours. Now, reports are between 1,500 and 3,000 troops could be sent to escalate U.S. operations. At the same time, U.S. President Trump says that talks with the regime in Iran are underway. And here is what he said about that late on Tuesday.
Because they're going to make a deal. They're going to make a deal. They did something yesterday that was amazing, actually. They gave us a present, and the present arrived today. And it was a very big present worth a tremendous amount of money. And I'm not going to tell you what that present is, but it was a very significant prize. And they gave it to us, and they said they were going to give it. So that meant one thing to me: we're dealing with the right people.
All right, what does all this mean? The question, I guess, is this the US signaling it is ready to fight harder, or is Trump building his off-ramp with troops to serve as the guardrails? Let's talk about this.
Yeah, so big questions to address there. We want to go and put those questions to Thomas Juneau. He is an academic and an author. He's written extensively about Iran, and he is a former analyst with the Department of National Defense in Canada. Thomas, it's good to have you with us. We'll start by just asking you, what did you hear when President Trump said that the leadership in Iran has given the U.S. a present? Do you know what was he talking about?
I don't know what he was talking about, and I'm not even going to try to guess. With President Trump, there are so many wild statements and affirmations that are sometimes stretching the truth or literally inaccurate, that in this case, I'm not going to try to guess. I think the point that I'm taking from that statement is that he is signaling that he is seeing from the Iranian side a willingness to negotiate. To me, I think that is the key takeaway. What exactly was said or not said by the Iranians at this point, I simply don't think there's a way to know.
What about these U.S. troops? Where would you say that they are headed?
I think the signal that Trump wants to send here is that he is very interested to negotiate. As you refer to an off-ramp, I think Trump clearly wants an off-ramp. He wants this war to end. He wants to be able to tell the American people that he has won. He wants to be able to build the narrative that he has won the war. But at the same time, he is always, and this has been a constant in his time as president and even before, he doesn't want to signal weakness to the Iranians, or at least he wants to try not to signal weakness. So by deploying these troops, he is signaling to the Iranians that if there is no serious negotiation, or that if those negotiations do not succeed, that he is willing to continue the war. So in a sense, the question is whether he's bluffing. Is he really willing to continue the war if there is no success in the negotiations? I'm not sure what the answer to that question is. My assessment is that he more and more wants this war to end, but he clearly wants to send the signal to the Iranians that he still has leverage to continue, because there is a perception that right now on the Iranian side, there is a perception that they are winning, that they are the ones who are in a position to extract concessions from the U.S., which is kind of the signaling game that the two sides are engaged in right now.
And I want to talk about their leverage in just a moment. I want to ask you, though, about the suggestions in the last 24 hours that we've heard that these U.S. troops may be aiming to take control of Karg Island. Now, that is the heart of Iran's oil production. We've got a map, too. We want to show our viewers exactly where that is. I mean, if you don't follow the news closely or if you don't know anything about the oil industry, you would certainly on a map not notice this. But, I mean, this really is like the aorta of the heart of the oil production industry for Iran. And with that in mind, let's take a listen to what was said last night by Lieutenant General Keith Kellogg. He was on Fox News. I'm going to pull him up, and I want you to take a listen to what he said about this mission and what he thinks these special forces are going to be doing. Here we go.
But taking Karg Island and also taking the Strait of Hormuz. Look, we kind of need to do it the way the Romans used to do it. You need to put your legions on the ground to secure the territory and give them confidence that they can do it, that we can open up the strait. Look, I know there's risk involved. There's always risk involved, but those kids, those young men and women, they understand the risk involved on taking both Karg and opening up the Strait of Hormuz as well. So they've got the ability to do it. The amphibious ready groups of the Marines, they can open up the lower half of the strait, do it. And then I turn around to maybe the 82nd Airborne Division or Rangers or somebody like that to take Karg Island. But taking Karg Island and also taking the Strait of Hormuz.
We're not going to let it loop through anymore. Let me ask you, Thomas, I mean, obviously we're not talking about the Roman Empire here, but is he implying there that U.S. policy should be speak softly or speak loudly and still carry a big stick? Is that what the 82nd Airborne Division, the deployment of these soldiers, is that what that's about?
Well, first of all, right now there is somewhere between 6,000 to 8,000 American additional troops being deployed to the Persian Gulf. There's about 4,000 to 5,000 Marines that have been on their way for a few days. Apparently, they're going to arrive in the Persian Gulf region by the end of this week. They're coming from the Indo-Pacific. And now there seems to be a small number of thousands of troops from the airborne, from the Rapid Reaction Force, that could be deploying to the region also imminently. So by the end of the week, you could have 6,000 to 8,000 additional troops. To be clear, that is far, far, far from insufficient to do what General Kellogg just mentioned on the clip you showed, which is seize the Strait of Hormuz. I'm not even sure what that means precisely, but that would be a large-scale operation that would require tens of thousands of troops and a lot of heavy equipment that is not in the region right now. So what the general was describing on Fox News, which is an idea that's been floating around for a while, is a large-scale operation. It is not a surgical operation for which the U.S. do not have the capabilities in the region right now. And with only airstrikes for almost a month now, they have not been able to do that. The more specific operation that he referred to that has been discussed a lot in the media recently is the seizure specifically of Karg Island, which is at the end of the Persian Gulf, not at the mouth of the Persian Gulf, like where there's the Strait of Hormuz. That is an idea that circulates a lot that is very problematic in many ways. In a narrow sense, I have no doubt that U.S. Marines and airborne troops could seize Karg Island purely from a technical perspective. The challenge, however, is what do you do after that? Karg Island is a small island of only a few square kilometers, but it is flat. There is no natural protection, mountains, for example. So the American troops who would be there, in addition to American ships and arguably maybe helicopters and a bit of equipment like that, would be completely exposed and vulnerable to Iranian retaliation. Iranian drones, Iranian missiles on the Iranian coast, which is just a few kilometers away, would be able to shoot at them at will with very little protection. So I do not see how you actually sustain the seizure of Karg Island at this point.
I'm just going to jump in here, Brent, actually, because we've got a lot of comments and questions jumping up here in our chat. We've got Atseki Machan, who's saying if Trump wants to end the war, why don't he and Iran, why aren't they able to mutually agree with each other in terms of their respective differences? That would obviously involve talking and compromise. And we also have a question from Mr. Sylvester Law. What was the troop build-up before the US started past operations, for example, the two Iran and Afghanistan wars? This is presumably, Thomas, a very different situation.
So on the second question, that's a great question. That to me, and the answer to that question, it highlights a couple points. First, it highlights the absolute improvisation of this war. Before Iraq, in particular, there was a buildup of troops over months. If you go back to 1990-91, when the U.S. expelled Saddam Hussein from Kuwait, same thing. There was a buildup of hundreds of thousands of troops over months. There was the buildup of a coalition. There were extensive plans that were being made, and so on. In this case, the fact that these troops are being sent now, 1 month into the war, as opposed to before, illustrates not only the improvisation, but also illustrates the very limited options that the U.S. has at this point, in the sense that a larger scale operation to do, for example, what General Kellogg mentioned on Fox News that you just showed in your clip, that is not a realistic option at this point because they simply do not have the assets, and it would take, at a minimum, additional weeks, not days, but weeks to build up the capability to do that. On the other question, which kind of builds into this one on talks, if the U.S. had chosen to stop the war after about a week, when the U.S. was hitting Iran very hard, assassinating leadership, degrading military capabilities, Iran was very much on the back foot. I think there could have been a scenario at that point where the U.S. could have unilaterally stopped and Iran would have more or less stopped on its own. There would have been a lot of bluster, a lot of threats, but pretty much that's what it would have happened. Now we're in a different dynamic. Now the U.S. could stop, but there's no guarantee that Iran will stop. Iran has seized control of the Strait of Hormuz, and that has given it tremendous leverage that it will not simply abandon. So there must be a very complicated negotiation at this point. There are rumors that over the weekend, the U.S. sent a proposal. There are rumors of a 15-point peace plan that would correspond to what we often call a grand bargain, where Iran would abandon its nuclear program, abandon a good chunk of its missile program, maybe not all of it, diminish a lot of its support for armed groups in the region, in exchange for, among other things, relief of all or at least most international sanctions. That is something that is apparently on the table. The willingness of Iran to negotiate at this point is not clear. Iran feels very committed to continuing operations on its own side. It's not clear who will negotiate on the Iranian side as well. It's not clear that Iran trusts the U.S. at this point because previous rounds of negotiations were interrupted by attacks.
Thomas,
and in any case, that would be... Sure.
Let me just interrupt and ask you, when we say what Iran wants, what Iran is going to do, I mean, which Iran are we talking about here? Because we know that the leadership of the regime has been decapitated. That's the word we've been hearing time and time again. But Iran has successfully, so far as we know, they've been able to replace these leaders quickly, the leaders that have been killed. At the same time, it's hard to imagine that the leaders are able to effectively lead or govern at the moment. I can't imagine that they're ever in the same place at the same time because there would be the danger, of course, being hit by some type of missile, probably from Israel. So are they able to lead effectively right now? And are they able to even send someone and communicate with the Trump administration?
So I think the way you frame the question is really the right one, in the sense that the Islamic Republic is alive. It is not on the verge of collapse. Leaders who have been assassinated, from the supreme leader all the way up to other to military commanders, ministers, the Minister of Intelligence, they have been replaced. There were contingency plans in place that are being implemented. So the regime is continuing. It is not on the verge of collapse. That being said, communication inside the regime is very difficult. Everybody inside the regime, the supreme leader, military commanders, ministers, they know that they are under intense surveillance from Israeli and American intelligence. You have to assume that their communications are extremely cautious, that they speak through messengers, that they avoid meeting together. That's how the supreme leader was killed when he met with several of his top advisors. They were all killed at the same time on the first day of the war. So that means that, yes, there is still a regime that is able to function, but its communication, its decision-making process has got to be much slower right now. So that means that a response to a very complicated and ambitious peace proposal by the U.S. will be difficult because of these logistical challenges. And then, as you mentioned, there's the simple issue of physical travel to meet Americans. Right now, Iranian leaders know that they are under surveillance. So by traveling, they would be exposing themselves, especially if it's a senior member of the regime. So there will be a degree of reluctance at that level as well.
Do you think we're at a level, though, if the Iranians want to send someone, and I mean, there have been names that have been thrown out, if they wanted to do that, then it's going to take serious coordination with the Americans and the Israelis, right? I mean, you don't want to send out a negotiator and have that person then hit by an Israeli missile and killed, right? I mean, are we at a point where that type of logistical cooperation can take place?
The narrow answer is that I don't know, in the sense that we don't have that precise information in public, but it's a safe assumption that the answer is yes, in the sense that if the Iranians want to respond, they will send the message to the Americans, okay, but how do we do this? There have been a lot of media reports, especially in the last 24 hours, that Pakistan, which is interesting, is playing a key intermediary role in terms of transferring messages between the two sides. The general, who is the de facto most important person in Pakistan, General Munir, is known to be close to the IRGC, the Revolutionary Guards, who are by far the most powerful entity in Iran and have become increasingly powerful since the war started. He has a good relationship with them. He has good channels of communication with them. He also has a good relationship with the Speaker of Parliament in Iran, Ghalibaf, who is probably the most influential person in the system right now, or certainly one of the most influential. But General Munir in Pakistan has also had a good relationship with President Trump.
Yep.
He's been to Washington twice. He's met him. They've had good interaction. So he seems to be emerging as the conduit for these messages.
If the Iranians are working with these handicaps, then if they look at just the geography of the area, for them, it would seem that the most effective strategy would be to make sure that the Strait of Hormuz is never 100% secure. And that's something they can do, right? I mean, we heard from the Pentagon last week or week before last, the comment was made that it's almost impossible to guarantee that you can shoot down every drone that is fired towards an oil tanker. Is that how you see it?
Absolutely. You know, we've been wargaming, studying scenarios of war in the Persian Gulf for decades. As you mentioned, I was with the Department of National Defense before becoming an academic. We've looked into that. The Americans have looked into this. We've always known in theory that in the event of a full-out war between Iran and the US or Israel or both, Iran's main asset, its main leverage, would be trying to close down the Strait of Hormuz. We always knew that in theory. Now we know that in practice. Now the precedent has been set, and that is a precedent that will not be forgotten by Iran itself and by everybody else, especially Iran's neighbors, but also all the companies that own the tankers that ship through the Strait of Hormuz. That is a source of leverage, a source of power that Iran will absolutely maintain and will use in the future. And the basic reason for that power is geography. You just have to look at a map, as you've shown, that shows how Iran can so easily control the Strait of Hormuz because it controls the entire northern coast, and it's very difficult terrain on the Iranian side. It's very mountainous, so they can hide assets easily. Drones, missile launchers, speedboats laden with explosives, and so on. So moving forward, the threat of closing again, of threatening shipping again in the Strait of Hormuz will constantly hang over our heads and will always give Iran a lot of leverage because now the precedent has been set. And remember that the companies that own the oil tankers that ship through the Strait of Hormuz, by definition, they are risk averse. They will be very reluctant to go through the Strait of Hormuz if there is a risk of being hit by Iranian drones and missiles. And it takes only one threat of one hit to get a lot of companies to say, we are not taking that risk, we are standing back.
They want insurance too. They're not going to be out anywhere if they can't get their vessels insured. That's
right. That's a huge
problem.
issue, isn't it? Yeah. Thomas, I just wanted to, again, I'm keeping an eye on the comments coming in, and we've got a question from John Great 3190. He's saying, could the increase of US forces to the Middle East, particularly Saudi Arabia, instigate a wider war? You know, so sort of looking at the bigger picture, is that something that you think, you know, is a scenario? People are obviously worried about this spreading.
It is a scenario, and for several days now, there have been a lot of rumors that Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates in particular are actively considering joining the strikes against Iran. I view that as a possibility, but far from a certainty, in the sense that Saudi Arabia and the UAE are furious at Iran. They are suffering important costs because of Iranian strikes. There are costs that will continue long after the war. This will be a very costly war for them. So they are really feeling the a willingness to enact revenge against Iran. But at the same time, they are mindful that their capabilities are limited. Yes, they could strike Iran, but they would not make a major difference in the balance of forces in this war. And B, by striking Iran, they would fuel an escalation that is already hurting them very much. So they need to balance these two sets of competing priorities. For now, I would say that it is probably a bit more likely that they will not join into the war. But if this does go on, if the talks that have been rumored to be going on now do not succeed, if the war continues, and if Iran continues to hit Saudi Arabia and the UAE hard, as it has been doing, then the probability of Saudi and the UAE at some point joining in on the strikes does increase.
We were talking this morning, preparing this, and just asking ourselves, if you are old enough to remember the Iranian hostage situation, 1979, President Carter at the time, he ordered what became a failed attempt by the U.S. to rescue those U.S. hostages. I mean, it was a major disaster, and people say that it cost him the next election. That's why many people say Ronald Reagan became the next president. I mean, I can imagine that the United States, particularly in the Pentagon, but also I would imagine in the White House, they have to be hyper aware of history, and they know that they cannot allow something like that to happen a second time. Do you think this ghost of the past is haunting the Pentagon and the White House right now?
And we can see...
Yeah, these are images.
That's right, we can see images from 1979, back then, the hostage crisis in Iran. But Thomas, sorry, go ahead.
I would make a difference between the bureaucracy at large in the U.S., the Pentagon, the military side, the planners, the intelligence community, and the political level in the White House. Within the military, within the intelligence community, what is going on right now is not a surprise. This war had been war gamed to death for decades now. Mm-hmm. It was widely known among experts in and out of government that Iran would close the Strait of Hormuz. The impact on oil prices was known, was anticipated. The impact on the neighbors, the fact that Iran would lash out when its survival was at stake. All of that was known. The ghosts of the past, as you very accurately referred to, were also known. That disaster of an attempt to rescue the hostages during the hostage crisis has been extensively studied in the U.S. to understand why it was such a failure. I think these warnings, these words of caution, were widely known. Are they being transmitted to the White House? I don't know. Are they being listened to? I strongly suspect not. Just looking at some of President Trump's reactions in the last month, when he said, for example, nobody would have expected Iran to hit back at its neighbors. Nobody would have expected Iran to close the Strait of Hormuz. We are going to be able to reopen the Strait of Hormuz really easily. All of that is fantasy. All of that is delusion. All of that goes completely against the advice and against everything that we all know would have been the case with this war. So my assumption, which is not something that I can verify, is that these issues, these warnings, these dangers and risks are widely known inside the machine, but the advice is not being listened to at the very top.
Can we talk about Israel just for a second? We, again, were discussing this earlier, and we were wondering how much of this is designed to placate the Israeli leader, Benjamin Netanyahu. I mean, he said just recently, we need ground troops. How much has this got to do with Israel?
Well, obviously, it has a lot to do with Israel in the sense that this is a joint American-Israeli operation. The debate that's been going on in the U.S. and elsewhere is whether the war was led by Israel, that Israel brought the U.S. into this war, that Netanyahu somehow manipulated Trump into getting into this war. This is an idea that, for example, is very popular in far-right circles in the U.S., including in the far-right wing of the MAGA pro-Trump coalition. It's also an idea that's quite popular on the left, including on some segments of the far left. I tend to be a bit skeptical of that idea. Of course, Israel is playing a key role. Of course, this is a joint American-Israeli operation. But the idea that Israel would have manipulated or somehow led the U.S. into this war is not something that I see aligned with the evidence. This is a war that President Trump wanted. This is a war that a significant section of the Republican Party, of the hawkish anti-Islamic Republic wing of the Republican Party has long wanted. Despite knowledge of the risks, there is a lot of opposition to Iran within the Pentagon, within the American national security apparatus. So I don't think there's evidence that convincingly shows Israel manipulated the U.S. into coming into this war. It's just that they're working together. On the Israeli side, the objective is more ambitious than on the American side. I think Trump could very well stop this war, maybe soon, maybe not, but content with having weakened the Islamic Republic. On the Israeli side, the objective is really, we want this regime to fall. We don't really care what happens next. It can be chaos and instability. We just want this regime that supports groups that want to kill us, Hezbollah, Hamas, this regime that attacks us. We just want it to fall. If Trump stops the war before regime collapse, which is probably what is going to happen, Israel would probably be disappointed, a bit frustrated, but ultimately I think they will also stop the war and simply follow Trump's lead, even if there might be a bit of tension.
I wonder, Thomas, do we know as much as we think we know? I mean, if we look at last summer, there was the missile attack on Iran, and we were told then by the White House that Iran has been basically taken out of commission. And now here we are with an even bigger conflict going on. The intelligence that the U.S. is getting, that Israel is getting, is it reliable intelligence, do you think?
I think it broadly is. I think the lies and the amplifications and the misinformation, the disinformation comes from the political level. And let me give you a very clear example. At the time of the June 2025 war, during which Israel and the US struck Iran's nuclear program very hard, Trump came out and said Iran's nuclear program has been obliterated. Nobody seriously believed that. Pro-Trump diehards did. Nobody seriously believed that. The U.S. Defense Intelligence Agency, so the military intelligence organization itself, came out and said, no, that's not true. And they gave a much more nuanced assessment. There has been some damage, which is true, but the program has been far from obliterated. And he actually lost his job after that. So the issue here is not one of wrongful intelligence. The issue is one of President Trump amplifying, lying, exaggerating, spreading mis or disinformation and ignoring the intelligence, and actually trying to politicize the intelligence by forcing the intelligence community into silence, for example. That's a huge problem, but it's a distinct one from wrong intelligence per se.
Thomas, I'm going to ask you a question which might be difficult to answer, but if you listen to your gut, what is that telling you about what is going to happen next?
I've stopped trying to predict Trump's actions. On the Canadian side, we have been on the receiving end of a lot of Trump's bullying on the trade side, on the security side, and trying to figure out the next steps that he will commit to is extremely difficult, because I'm not even sure in some cases that he knows himself. There would be a separate discussion as to how extraordinarily damaging and absurd and dangerous it is to engage in a war that is putting a region in fire on the basis of his own gut feelings. To me, that is an absolute scandal. We will live with the consequences of that for a long time. This is not a war that is going to be over when the violence, the shooting simply stops. To answer directly your question, having caveated that, I more and more think that the war will stop in a matter of days, in the sense that Trump will decide to stop, whether it's unilaterally or as a result of negotiations. All of the proposals that are rumored to circulate between the U.S. and Iran, these will take months to negotiate if they are to succeed. They will not be agreed to in a matter of hours or days. So what could happen within the next days, maybe 1 week, maybe 2 weeks, is a very vague and loose agreement in principle to stop and then to agree to negotiate on some of these principles, with both sides able to come out and claiming victory. Iran will say, we won because we survived, we closed the Strait of Hormuz. The U.S. will say, we won because we weakened the Islamic Republic. And both of them will not be entirely wrong. Yeah. That is, I would say, likely, but I wouldn't rule out a scenario whereby the war just continues on for weeks because there cannot be an agreement between the two sides. And that's a difficult scenario.
Yeah, and if this war does end sooner rather than later, maybe at the end of this year, we'll be able to say the war was shortened, made possible by those U.S. midterm elections that the president also and his Republicans have their eyes on. Who knows?
We'll see.
We'll see, exactly.
We'll see.
Thomas, Juneau, we appreciate you taking the time to talk with us. Excellent getting your insights. Someone who can give us a really, really well-informed look at what is happening right now. Thank you.
Really great to have you with us. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right, what a great guest. That
Yeah,
was,
very good.
super interesting. We're going to start talking about now another really, really important aspect of everything to do with the conflict in Iran. And if you are watching from anywhere in Asia, like I said a little earlier, you know that things are getting really expensive because energy is so expensive. Energy prices keep rising because of this conflict, and that's because the whole region is so dependent on oil from the Middle East. I think it's 90%, isn't it? We're going to have a quick listen to the managing director of the Energy Shift Institute. He said this, and it really sort of is on the point of what's happening.
I think the Philippine government is trying to send a broader signal that the situation is indeed an emergency to the broader stakeholders, the public and the businesses. The longer the crisis goes, the deeper it will be, and it's quite likely that other countries within the Southeast Asia region could likely follow suit.
All right, so that was talking specifically about the fact that the Philippine government has announced an energy emergency, which just shows what a massive effect all of this is happening. The longer the crisis goes, obviously, as he said, the deeper it will be. So we are going to talk to our colleague, Kenya Winanti. She is in Jakarta, that's the capital of Indonesia, because we want to get a sense of really how this is going deeper, how people's lives are being affected across Asia. Kenya, I'm going to start with a comment, if I may. So we have a lot of comments and questions coming into our live stream here. Again, Seiki Machin was saying, I'm sorry to say this, but I feel so furious about this war that ended up having this energy crisis. We're badly affected, and especially the summer season has started in Asia, and we know that that is obviously when energy is needed even more. So can you just give us a sense, first of all, what is happening where you are? You're in Jakarta. Prices are high. How are people dealing with this?
Yeah, so the war in Iran has served as a wake-up call and also a shock to energy supply in most countries in Asia. As you mentioned about the Philippines has taken the most dramatic steps with its prime minister declaring a state energy emergency yesterday because it has relied heavily on imported fuel, and that has actually impacted the livelihoods or the life of people on the streets. Like, for example, the jeepney, or maybe you all know, like tuk-tuk drivers, but they are called it as jeepney. Jeepney drivers has staged a protest because of the fuel hike in the country. And the malls there are considering to have shorter operational hours to basically reduce operating costs and also reduce any other costs because of the energy crisis. But if we talk about Indonesia, at the moment, we just had a long Eid holiday, and because of that, the government has cushioned the impact of the fuel price, but it has taken a toll to Indonesia's fiscal deficit, and it has now basically reached more than the 3% legal cap of the deficit. And now the Indonesian government is trying to sort out on how to basically compensate that.
So, Kenya, what you're saying is that it kind of tried to protect people from the reality of what was going on. It didn't want people to get anxious, but in fact now it's struggling to deal with the reality.
Yes, you're right, because usually in Indonesia, during the Eid holiday, people spend a lot of they spend a lot of money to have fuel for what we call as mudik, or basically homebound exodus, where people go back to their hometowns and they spend a lot of consumer goods because of that's the time of family gatherings. Because of that, the government had tried to protect the people from creating fear, so they have been cushioned by trying to protect the fuel price in its pre-war rate. And that also happens actually in Japan right now. If I may to jump to Japan, Japan has released the 45 stock oil stock to avoid creating fear or creating a panic among the people. And talking about fear, basically the Philippines, going back to the Philippines, now the Philippines or the Filipinos people are concerned about the upcoming Easter week in which, like Indonesian, they will have also Exodus homecoming. And now people are considering whether they will go or not because of the high price of transportation costs and also because of the fuel price as well.
Okay, so people are traveling less, so their lives really are being impacted. I know that we're jumping around here and we're talking about different parts of Asia, which is obviously a really big region, but we just wanted to bring in something that the president of the Philippines, President Marcos, or rather what his government released yesterday. So the government, as we said, has declared a national energy emergency. And this morning, President Marcos made a statement. We're going to take a quick listen and then we'll come back to you, Kenya.
Yes.
Have we got that? Are we able to play what President Marcos said? I think we are hoping to play that. No? Okay.
I think that we can be fairly confident. We can be confident that after the 45 days, we will still have already arrived here in the Philippines. We will have already a flow of oil, not just one delivery, not just two deliveries, but a flow of petroleum and petroleum-related products.
All right. Okay. So President Marcos obviously not trying to hide what is going on and making clear that this is a really, really serious situation.
I would say I would appreciate the moves from President Marcos because President Marcos trying to be honest with the people, and that based on our interviews with the people, they feel basically, although they're frustrated, they also feel grateful because of the honesty that they have. But with that declaration, basically the president giving an executive order so that the government officials can have more sources or power to do fuel procurement. And for your information, the Philippines has also taken a pragmatic steps in procuring oil. As we all know that Manila has been a close ally to the Washington, and they have been trying to very careful on what they do when they try to procure oil. But in this kind of situation, recently Manila even has coordinated with Washington so that they can resource their oil from countries that have been sanctioned by the U.S., including Venezuela, Iran, and Russia. And just yesterday, they had one tanker arrive from from Russia for the oil stock. So I think in this situation, this kind of war does not only impact the energy crisis, but also it is testing the geopolitical positions of countries, especially in Asia.
Absolutely. I'm just looking at this comment from Dan Broom, one of our viewers, who says the oil futures market is the real boots on the ground in this battlefield. So oil is just such a major element. There are so many, Asia, like we said, is such a big region. We could ask you about so many places. We've got one viewer, John Gray, asking, what of China? I wanted to actually ask you about India, the world's most populous country. That's no doubt been badly affected by this conflict.
Yeah, I think India gives an example of how a balancing ties works in this kind of situation. India has just seen four of its oil tankers passing through the Strait of Hormuz. That's thanks to the diplomacy taken by the Prime Minister Modi, and how India trying to balance the powers between Iran and the U.S. As I noted that India, after the U.S. strike one of the naval vessels by Iran, India provided shelters of the two other naval vessels of Iran during that strike. And when the U.S. strike some facilities in Iran and created casualties in Iran, India restrained itself from saying something. They only said it after several days or several weeks. And because of that dynamics, because of that steps, it makes India basically now concede that four tankers could passing through the Strait of Hormuz, basically to balance these two powers during this war.
What about Taiwan? I mean, they make almost all of the world's semiconductor chips. Now, that is majorly energy intensive. What's the situation there?
You're right. The government has basically warned its people of the increasing prices of increasing consumer prices, because the energy crisis has impacted or has disrupted supply chains, as well as the household costs. Because you know that, as you mentioned, that Taiwan produced the world's largest semiconductor chips, and it resources the energy for that 90% from the Gulf countries. And to basically confront that crisis, Taiwan has reconsidered to reactivate two of its nuclear power plants to basically overcome the situation that they are facing right now. So I think in Asia, in conclusion, basically they are scrambling on how to basically confront the crisis, because each country here has different complexities. They have, but most of us, or most of the Asian countries, resource our energies from the Gulf countries. And now a lot of countries are trying to basically rethink on how they resource their energy supplies and pushing for alternative energy.
Exactly, that was what I wanted to ask you. We've actually got a question here. Can other major energy producers shift their supply chain, or you know, some countries are too dependent on one source of energy? That is obviously a massive issue here. I mean, is this situation changing people's attitudes towards where their energy comes from? I mean, do you think that, you know, Asia's economies might be sort of turning now towards renewable energy to end their reliance on oil, Kenya?
I do think so. I mean, like the way they will realize or they will do it might be a bit difficult, but I think the push toward that green or alternative energy will be higher, or the commitment to there will be higher, because let's take an example of Indonesia right now. The government has said that they will accelerate the use of EV vehicles, for example. Although it's a long stretch, it's a solution for far stretch or long-term solutions. But basically, this situation has boost their commitment for rethinking other alternatives. Although now the case mostly in Southeast Asia countries, or in Asia in general, countries that have left coal sources have now returned, or at least they're reconsidering to return to coal to balance the situation, or to this crisis. But going back to your question, a lot of countries in Asia have now rethinking on how to source their energy. Not only like the Philippines case, they're rethinking about resourcing from other countries like Russia, but also the material source like the EV, or for example electricity base.
That's right. It's often in times of crisis, isn't it, that people start looking to the future, but often it is one step forward, two steps back in terms of sort of reaching back towards reliance on coal. Right. But really, really interesting. Kenya Winanti in Jakarta. Thank you, Kenya. We really appreciate having a conversation with you. Thank you. All right.
So it's what? We've been talking about troops.
That's right.
Talking and who
and
is going to
energy.
end up paying for it all.
That's right, that's right. But I think we are close to coming to the end of this. Thank you again for all of your questions. Oh, I can just see one here. We have to invest more solar energy, more energy like solar panels. There you go. Yeah. So some people are fans of renewables. We just want to give you a quick update before we go, bring you up to speed with the latest developments in the US-Israeli war against Iran, and obviously all of its ripple effects, because this is affecting all of us. So Iran's military is saying that the US is negotiating with itself. This comes after comments from the US President Donald Trump, who claimed that he was talking to Iran and that Iran wanted a deal so badly. So mixed messaging there. Also, Iran's mission to the UN says that non-hostile vessels will be allowed to pass through the Strait of Hormuz. And finally, the Associated Press news agency says Iran has confirmed it has received a peace plan from the US. Now, that is according to 2 Pakistani officials. So that will probably lay the path for more talking and maybe less boots on the ground.
We will see. We will see. It is, 1:45 in the afternoon here in Berlin. And that's going to wrap up this live stream. We appreciate you staying with us. We appreciate your comments and your questions. And we look forward to doing it again.
That's right. See you again soon. Bye-bye. It was great, Ben Croft.